Hello and welcome. This is Angie with CountryStreetCottage.net. Today we're going to talk about sublimation on mugs and on tumblers. We're going to talk about a few methods that you can use for the sublimation, as well as a few materials for the actual sublimation ink. So we're going to do mugs. It's just a standard coffee mug, but there's a catch. So you will need sublimation surfaces. I'm going to link to all the surfaces, cut files, everything I'm using below. These are free cut files, all the cacti. And this is the tumbler we're going to be using. And for all of our methods, we're actually going to use a tumbler wrap, which helps to hold the design to the mug or the tumbler. These are designed for the tumbler itself. We're going to work through some tips and tricks on using it for the mugs and do some experiments. By the end, we will have a method where you can do the sublimation on the mug successfully, as well as sublimation on the tumbler successfully. So let's get started and look at the supplies we'll need. All right, so we are going to experiment with the Infusible ink markers, Infusible ink sheets, as well as artistry markers. So all of these are sublimation ink, so you will need sublimation surfaces. This is a mug, it's a sublimation mug, and it is coated with a sublimation coating. Now, I'm going to link sources for everything I'm going to use in the description below, including the sublimation mugs. I purchased these on Amazon. I'm also going to use a sublimation tumbler. So this is a cute tumbler with a lid. And again, sublimation coating on the outside. And then the secret to what we're going to do are these tumbler wraps. The secret to this is putting your design on your mug or your tumbler and having it where it doesn't move. Most people like use tape and try to tape it down, but if it moves just a little bit, you'll get ghosting and ruin your project. These tumbler wraps are going to prevent that. So we're going to use the tumbler wraps, and we're going to use a heat gun to actually shrink the tumbler wrap to the tumbler or the coffee mug. And then I have just a countertop oven that I'm going to use to do the sublimation process. I'll link to it below as well. I found one for like 40 bucks on Amazon, so super affordable. I'm also going to run some experiments just with the heat gun and see if I can get some sublimation to work with just a heat gun. Don't know if it'll work, but it's always worth a try. So let's get started first with how you're going to use your markers as well as your Infusible ink sheets to make the actual product we're going to put on our mugs and tumblers. So I'm starting with a light grip mat and just some regular copy paper. The only thing on your copy paper is you want it to be rated for use with a laser printer. That way the heat of the sublimation process does not affect the paper. And then we're just going to stick that to a light grip mat. Then we can draw our design with either the Infusible ink markers or the artistry markers. All right, Infusible ink markers, you will need to get either the regular pack that looks something like this, that actually goes into your Explorer or your Maker. There's also separate packs that are like freehand, where you can actually color your stuff in, or you can use this pack to color in. Now, you will need to, if you have the Joy, you'll need to look for ones that are marked for Joy because the pens are two different sizes. The artistry markers, I was able to put those in the Joy just by themselves without any adapter, so they will work in the Joy. Now, you will need an adapter if you're going to use these with your Explorer or your Maker, and I'll link to one that I know has been used below so you can get that as well. Whichever marker you have, be sure to mirror your design, draw it with your Cricut, and then we'll come back and take a look at coloring that in. So here are a few designs that I just drew with my Cricut. So we're just going to have kind of a cactus theme going on with this one. And then we could just color these in with whatever markers we want to use that for. So the Infusible ink, they make some like brush tips and some freehand markers, or you can just use the regular markers. You can use just the regular markers with the artistry. I like, like a couple of different colors of green on the cactus, that type of thing. So you just have to play around with the colors you have and just color these in, just like you were coloring a coloring book page or something like that. Super, super easy. Just color the entire design in. And so we have a few of those here that are ready to be put on mugs. And again, I just colored those in with markers. These 3 were with Infusible ink. This one was with a variety of artistry markers. So we're going to try both of those for sublimation on mugs and tumblers and see what happens. Now I am going to cut some Infusible ink with a cactus design as well. And I will link in the description below to a video that's all about Infusible ink transfer sheets. So if you don't know how to cut those, I will link to that below. Just be sure to mirror that design when you cut it and pick Infusible ink from your drop-down menu. So now let's take a look at adding these designs to our mugs and tumblers using those tumbler wraps. So here's the best way I've found to get that wrap to stay on in the oven. First, we're going to use a couple small pieces of tape and secure that paper ink side down to our mug. Then we'll cut the sublimation wrap. The area where the design is, you want to be in the center, and then we'll wrap around. And this first part, we'll put a long piece of tape. So you want a piece of tape that goes from the top of the mug to the bottom. Tape that all the way down. And then you want one piece of tape, fairly long, going across. And then this portion you can put underneath your handle. Another long piece of tape. Pull this as tight as possible. Tape across. Add one more piece of tape this way. Then we're going to use our heat gun to shrink the wrap to the mug. Then once you have that shrunk, we're going to add 2 more pieces of tape on the back. And now this mug is ready for the oven. We're going to repeat the same procedure for our tumblers. I'm going to add the design, again ink side down, and tape it into place with some heat resistant tape. You just need like a couple of pieces each because the wrap itself will hold the design. So just going to add the tape in a couple of places. And then for the tumblers, they will actually fit inside this heat wrap. So we do not have to cut it. We can just put the tumbler inside. And then we will turn on this heat gun and you can watch the magic happen. And we'll just roll that over. There you have a tumbler ready for the oven. So I'm just going to repeat the same procedure for all of our other things. And one thing to note, so I am writing on these. So this was the Infusible ink. And so I'm just writing on this wrap, just with a Sharpie, just the initials. So I know which one is which when it comes out of the oven. So just to note that. And now I'll do my other 2 tumblers and put those in the oven. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this oven while it's heating up. Why a separate oven in your craft room? The sublimation ink actually gives off gas, so you don't want to use your like kitchen oven to do this. And this one is super small, so you can kind of see how big it is. And it heats up to the appropriate temperature, and it's large enough for mugs and tumblers. So that's kind of why I chose this one. So all I did is put the bottom rack in only, and then I set this to 350, and I put this on bake. And then I put this on 5 minutes so it would heat up. So I have it heating up, like preheating for 5 minutes. And then I'm going to put the mugs in first and heat those for, let's do 7 minutes. Then we'll remove those, add the tumblers, 7 more minutes, and then we'll take these wrappings off and see what happens. So the oven has heated up. So I'm just going to open this door. I'm going to place in our mugs first. I'm just going to use a towel to protect my hand. And I'm going to place my mugs inside. And I'm going to do all 3 at once. Close the door. And then I'm going to turn this to about 7 minutes and wait for the timer to go off. So we'll just add the tumblers to the oven. And then we will bake those for the 7 minutes as well. So here's our well-wrapped mug with the artistry paper attached. So we are just going to start removing this wrap. Then we can just peel back that tape and paper that has our sublimation ink on it. All right, so once we have the wrapping off the mugs, here's a closer look at some of the designs. So this one is Infusible ink. You can see that the colors are really, really good. And then this one is the Infusible ink transfer sheets. Now this was like a watercolor transfer sheet, but it did transfer really well. Now I kind of wanted to show you, I did 2 different ones with artistry. This one is an example of what happens if you don't tape that wrapper down really well. So the wrapper lifted on this side, and you can see how light that ink is on that side. Now, if I did the artistry markers and taped it down really well, you can see the huge, huge difference in the print and how gorgeous the colors are. So be sure to get that tape down really well. But otherwise, I think as far as the different types of sublimation ink, the comparison is really, like, I can't really tell a difference between Infusible ink and the artistry markers as long as I get it taped down really well and everything stays into place. All right, so now let's take a closer look at those tumblers once we get that wrap off. So this first one is with the Infusible ink markers, and you can see a discoloration at the bottom. These tumblers are curved, so if your design is so large that it goes around that curve, you will get discoloration. Because your paper can't conform to that curve, you get a little bit of discoloration around that area. Now with the Infusible ink transfer sheet, you really don't see that discoloration at the bottom, and that's why I love these watercolor designs, because it's so forgiving. So that it's super forgiving. Like there probably is some discoloration here, but you really can't see it and you don't notice it because it looks like it's part of the design. So that's why I love the transfer sheets. And this one is the artistry markers. Again, gorgeous, gorgeous colors, but again, you can see some discoloration and imperfection around that curved area just because of the way the paper lays on the curve. So overall, the brightness is super consistent between the Infusible ink and the artistry markers, and we get that same discoloration on the across the bottom with both, no matter which one we use, just because of the curve of the tumbler. All right, so now we have another drawing, and this is actually artistry. Does not matter on this one. We're just going to kind of experiment and see if a heat gun will transfer the design. So we're just going to put the design, again, sublimation mug. I'm going to tape it down on both sides. Then we're going to cut this sleeve. As far away as possible from our design. So we're going to tape this really well with several strips of heat resistant tape. So I'm going to tape it once all the way across, wrap it around, put it through the hole of the mug handle. And then before I tape this one, I want to tape this across, then pull this tight, tape this one, and once again, tape this across. Now I want to use my heat gun to shrink this down first. And now that it's shrunk, I want to use 2 more pieces of tape across this back area. And now, this is where my design is. I have this on my Easy Press mat just to protect my surface. And I'm going to use my heat gun and set my timer for about 7 minutes. I'm just going to rub it back and forth across the entire area where my sublimation design is located. And then we'll allow this to cool, peel it back, and see what our design looks like. All right, so this is the one we just did with the heat gun, and now we're going to remove the wrap and see if it worked. Then we'll remove the tape as well as the paper with our ink. And as you can see, it worked, but I get a super inconsistent result. So this is with just a heat gun. And you can see, like, in some areas it looks really well, but in other areas it doesn't. So I still recommend the oven. The $40 craft oven is, I think, the way to go if you want to do sublimation on mugs or tumblers. So now, who's ready to do some sublimation on some mugs and tumblers? Grab your artistry markers, your Infusible ink markers, your Infusible ink sheets for one that look like this, and get started today. Again, all the links are in the description below. Cut files for everything that we used today. There is links for all the supplies we used. There should be links for like tips and tricks on Infusible ink, that type of thing. If you can't find anything, just drop a comment below and let me know. If you have any questions about anything we've done, again, drop a comment, let me know. For me, myself, for mugs, I would use the markers or the sheets. Either one doesn't matter. I would use the Tumbler Wraps. The ones I'm linking are the size I'm using. And you can cut them down the side. Use the method with the heat resistant tape that we came up with to make sure it doesn't move. Now, I will try to find a larger Tumbler Wrap on Amazon, and I'll link that below as well. I do want to let you know that I have not tried those. The tumblers I would use, they were super simple, right? So just Infusible ink markers, artistry markers, Infusible ink sheets for this one. And then just use those Tumbler Wraps, and super simple. Just shrink those up with that heat gun. And then my number one tip is to get that oven. I will link to it below. But I definitely think that little craft oven will make your sublimation dreams come true on mugs or tumblers. So thank y'all so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, give us a thumbs up. Again, if you have any questions, you can drop those below. If you haven't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have videos like this all the time and you don't want to miss any of those. If you love all things Cricut, all things sublimation, you don't want to miss anything I have planned. So thank y'all so much for joining me and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.